Next up, we are starting this series of fairly rapid fire speakers, only speaking for 10 or 15 minutes each, just to give you a taste, a brief taste of who's doing what in the area, what's people's different area of expertise, all those kind of things. Our next speaker is Jason. Anyone who's been around the market here for some time would remember Jason was for several years the baker here at the market, and we were very sorry to see him go. Baking for Jason evolves around sourdough very, very much. And I've been eating his bread now for some years, and I can definitely make a recommendation on its tastiness and wholesomeness and those kind of things. Jason's recipe for a simple sourdough, if you haven't got a bar on you, is in the little booklet. So make sure you get a copy of that later on if you want to catch up on that. Okay, here he is.
Hi, I'm Jason Grignon. I used to do the bread here. I run a bakery in Nimbin, built my own brick oven. It was my second oven that I built, and now I do the Nimbin Farmers Market on a Wednesday, and I do a Lismore one, so give me sort of a little bit of freedom. Up a bit more? Yeah, okay, a little bit more freedom. I'll stand closer. A little bit more freedom on the weekends because bread is a very time-consuming. All right, I'll leave it. It's all good. But I thought I'd just come here and talk to you about maintaining. Thank you. How to maintain a sourdough culture, basically. I was going to go into the depths of making bread, but it is a very slow food product. I mean, I'm competing against a yeasted, mostly yeasted organization, like where most bakeries use just yeast. They can complete the whole process in 4 hours, and I'm more of a 12-hour to some of my breads are 36 hours. So to do it here would be, I would just be skipping too many steps. It's not really worth it. But what I will talk about is how to actually look after your culture. So I have 3 cultures with me. I generally keep 4 or 5, maybe more, depending on what I'm making. Any grain will do. So I'll concentrate just basically on grains. You learned about the nutrition, a bit the reasons why you do it, and then how, and I'll just talk about a bit more how you can do it. So I've got a rice here. So this is just a local brown rice that I just grind fresh, and it's a very most of my cultures are equal parts water to flour, or whatever grain it is. It makes it a whole lot easier when you're trying to figure out how much, especially in my game, if I want to make 100 loaves or if I want to make 1 loaf, mathematics, it just makes it much, much easier. So I generally stick with what we call in the baker's realm 100% hydration. So 100% flour to the same amount of water. So if you're ever reading cookbooks and you're a bit confused, the hydration level is based on the flour. So the flour is always 100%, and so then your bread gets knocked down to 60% hydration or 80%. Bit confusing, but with the culture it's easy if you just equal parts. And that's weight, not volume. Very, very important. It's weight, not volume. Because a cup of flour is a very different weight to a cup of water. So, and that's where you get into trouble. So I've got a rice one, ferments very quickly, 4 hours.
And then grains, eh?
Ground.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Ground. Can do with grain, absolutely. It just takes longer for it to hydrate. And we can go through it. I can talk about that a little bit, how to ferment your grains and stuff like that. Rye, really important to hydrate. To ferment. I would never encourage you to eat lots of rye that hasn't been properly fermented. Am I loud enough, Anna? Yeah, good. Okay. I wouldn't. It's got a lot of things in it that are not good for your digestion unless it's been properly fermented. Completely different to wheat. And then I've got just a wheat one here, which can be a spelt, can be a, and this is just an unbleached wheat. So this one, 12 hours fermentation. This one can go 24 hours, sometimes longer. Just to give you an idea of different grains, and that's just from my experience. And of course, weather has a lot to do with it, because this concept has been brought up in. I'll put them out here. The idea is very a cold weather thing. So you think most bread concepts came from Europe when they had lots of grain, or Canada or North America more recently. And so in this subtropical weather, it's very challenging. And so I've had to change a lot of what I know to make bread that is of sort of comparable quality. Which means, yeah, it becomes a very hands-on thing. So I can pass this around, And this has been going for about 10 hours, so everyone to just smell and taste and whatever, and I'm not concerned with how it comes back, if it comes back. 10 hours since I fed that. 10 hours since I fed that. So, and I'll go through how to feed it in a little bit. That is just an unbleached wheat, yeah, yeah. Which is just basically the brand's been taking off of it. So, and that's just because I know that would be a quicker ferment. It would go a little bit more sour, and you guys would get more sort of the honey undertones. So, not to take the romance out of sourdough, but if you have one from Alaska or one from San Francisco that's 100 years old, or you have one passed on, it's great. I'm sure it's a really good culture, but the bacteria is completely altered and changed by now. It is a bacteria that lives on the grain, which is very important why you want to use something that's fresh, preferably organic, because those pesticides are going to slow down or kill off those bacteria that you're concerned with. So that's just one of those things I really encourage. And then clean water. So in that jar is just flour and water. There's no salt, there's no sugars, there's no anything other than just flour and water. So yeah, so that's one really important thing when you're dealing with your culture. So I have, these few cultures, and I just keep them going all the time. They can live in the fridge, but from time to time you do need to take them out and feed them regularly. Sort of treat them, when they're young, you have to treat them like a young child and feed them all the time. Look after them, and then as they get older, you can kind of leave them a bit longer because they get stronger, if that makes sense. So how do I feel? Maybe I'll go through that right now. How to feed them. Simple. Just a clean jar. So if you have an old one, so I've got some here for sale. If anybody wants one, probably not really encourage it, but if you're one for, yes, I gotta have one, and that it will really jumpstart, because mine's 8 years old and it's strong as an ox. What I do is I'll take a small spoon and into the jar. And what you want to do is you want to think about doubling it every time you feed it. So if you're on a 12-hour cycle, and that's what works really well around here. Now, obviously in really hot weather, you have to do it more frequently. In colder weather, you can slack off a little bit in the wintertime. It's kind of like how we are. We're more active in the summertime and a little bit more dormant in the wintertime. It's just based on temperature kind of thing. So we'll go with equal parts water and flour. And I'll do this so that the microphone doesn't. So say I've got 50 grams of, it's a nice even number, 50 grams of culture, which is probably more like 2 spoons. Giving it lots of air, because it's living, right? It's got to breathe, needs oxygen, it needs food, and it needs water. So I've got the water and I've got the air, and then it's just flour. So this is just a wheat flour, and the same thing, I'm just making it. See, if I was doing this, I'd be measuring it to equal weight, like I said, not volume, weight. And I can just fudge it because I do this so often. I know exactly what it looks like with the right consistency.
If you don't have the mother starter, it's just flour and water.
If you don't have the mother starter, I recommend highly starting with rye. Rye is much, much easier. You'll have yourself lots more success. Not to say that you can't do it with another grain. And to change from one to another, where's that lid? There's that lid. And so, that's a fresh one. Here's a fresh one to smell. and it's just going to smell, it's just going to be stiffer, right? It's fairly stiff, that one.
So whatever, if it's the rice one, you're feeding it with rice flour.
Yeah, now the rice is a little different, but you can still get there. You absolutely can get there. So because we're talking about bacteria that lives on the grain, you're moving from one type of bacteria to the next. And so if you're even buying from flour from one farm to the next farm, it is going to change in bacteria. I notice it in whenever I buy flour. They do their best from a milling company or a Demeter milling company down in Gunnedah, and I get stuff out from Ferry Hill. I get spelt and rice from that guy, and it varies every time I get it. It's always different, and that has a lot to do, of course, with the temperature and with me as well. I know this is a lot to do. If I'm a bit sluggish and everything, so is the culture. So there's a lot of variables, hundreds of variables really involved with it. That's why I won't even get into actually making bread. We'll just talk about maintaining your culture. So you can change it from one grain to the next. It just takes several feeds, and then you'll actually get there. So we're sticking to 12-hour period, so we'll stick with wheat for now, with that kind of thing. 12-hour period. Every 12 hours you're feeding it. And so what you do, so you start off with a couple of tablespoons, and then you feed it, and then what do you do? What do you do with the leftovers? Because then you obviously have leftovers. If you want to keep a culture that you're not using, you want to pull that out of the fridge and feed that twice in a week. I'm encouraging it because this time of year is a good amount. So give it 2 good feeds in a row, so keep it out for a full day. Then you can stick it back, give it a good feed, stick it back in the fridge, and it'll be all right for the following week. So what do you do with this? The leftovers. You can do anything with it. Pancakes, scones, cookies, crumpets. Thank you. Cakes. I mean, a lot of my stuff is now fermented. I do croissants with it now. There's different fermentation times with it, and I encourage a bit of play to do with it as well. And you're just changing. So even if you're using a small amount, and let's say you're making a cake, and that's where the hydration thing comes really helpful, because if you know you need, 6 ounces 200 grams of flour, and you know you need this how many grams of water, you can just remove that from the recipe and add that little bit of culture to it. Give it a good mix and let it ferment. And now you're not going to keep any of that. So I really discourage the whole idea of taking that little bit of dough and then saving it for the next time, because you're adding other bacteria into it, and we often forget as well. You go, oh, I made the dough and then I put it in the oven and I forgot to save the culture. So I always encourage to just keep that jar separate. So whenever you're making your levain and you're making, you're feeding your bread, to save that little bit off the side and not get into I don't really encourage having the habit of saying, oh, I'll just take that little pinch of dough before it goes into the oven, because you often have other grains in there, or fruit, or other different types of things that can get involved with the bacteria. So it's a team of bacteria. So, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping around, but follow me here. It's a team of bacteria, and that's why you don't want to be pulling from different loaves of bread. So if you can, yeah, Anna?
Question there about the starter. You're
Yeah.
saying don't keep what's left in the jar.
Yeah, fresh jar.
Fresher. So you've got your mother.
So I've made
starter.
a new one. Put it in a fresh jar, which is being passed around,
Yeah.
and then this is the old one to be used.
No, I think what the question is every time you make a loaf of bread, is it a fresh starter that you use?
No, what's going around is you take some out of your starter,
Yep.
you feed it up and leave that to go on, and then you use up all of this.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So what am I doing with that starter? Yeah, so I'm taking that little bit out first, making a bit up, and then using up all of this. So how you can do it a little differently too is you can just take that little bit out and make that fresh, and then use what's here to create your new loaf. So that one that comes out of the fridge is not going to be used straight away for making a loaf of bread. You're going to have to feed that up a couple of times to get it strong, to get strengthened up. Is that clear? Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Can I just ask,
Yeah.
do you keep the lid on the jars all the time? Or
Not
does
all
that
the
not
time,
work?
but this flies and that sort of stuff this one is. Yeah, you can do a bit of cloth. This was a very strong dough. So, am I alright with time? Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll hurry up then. Well, it's a very strong dose, so you can leave the lid on there because you don't need to introduce more bacteria in it. The bacteria is not underneath the fig tree. It is not. There is some in the air, but you actually want the stuff that's in. And you'll find that a lot of bacteria gets onto it just when you're making your bread. So a whole team of bacteria are living in here as well. Could be 12, could be 20. And you want to really optimize the ones that are perfect for making bread, really. The one time, and I tried really hard, and I couldn't do it, to make an off culture, as you can have, because a lot of people talk about, oh, you've neglected your culture, you've neglected your starter, that sort of thing. That can happen. You get the black water on top, you get the sort of crustiness around, you know, it smells, it doesn't really actually smell, it doesn't smell sweet anymore. The only time when you're in trouble is when you start smelling acetone. Nail polish remover, paint thinner, that sort of like, that's really a difficult one. Any other time, it's really, really easy. And you just go and you stop the hole once a week. You go and you feed it twice a day or 3 times a day, depending on the heat. And you do that for a week straight. And it will come back really strong and really vibrant. Yeah?
Clarify, with feeding it,
Yeah.
that you take a spoon out and put it in a new jar
Yep.
every time.
Yep.
You don't just put some more flour and more water into the jar that you already took from the fridge.
Yeah, I do that. I have a container. It's 20 liters because I'm just feeding it, and that thing's going to get cleaned at the end of the week because I do it so often. But if you're, I was sorry, so thanks for asking the question. He wanted to know if you, every time you change out the jar and put a new jar. If you're not using your culture and you're just pulling it out once a week to do that, yeah, that's a good idea. It's a good idea to have a clean jar because you're trying to sort of keep the bacteria strong, and this bacteria that you want is of the new. So you have that team of 12 to 20 bacteria, could be more. They're all fighting for food. And as the food's running out, those bad bacteria are coming and they're taking over. And so that's what you want to get rid of. That's why you want to feed them. That's why you want to, you know, do that sort of thing. Maintain a little bit of cleanliness. Now you don't have to be over the top, but because you're trying to, keep it healthy, that's what I have to recommend, because until you really over the years see the signs. So just real quick, I'll finish on this sort of bad smell. That acetone smell that you're looking at, that you're talking about, is really the only time when you should consider throwing out your culture. You can fix it. It takes about a month, and you have to feed it really, really religiously, about every 4 to 6 hours, tripling its volume. It's pretty insane, and I've been through that, and I came out the other end. But I wouldn't really recommend it. You could come and bring it to me, and I'll have a smell of it and tell you, yeah, no. So other than that, that's the only time I would recommend not giving up, but consider giving up on your mother.
Do you use sterilized?
No more questions.
No.
That's enough. That's enough. That's a great point to end on. Thank you very much, Jason. Okay.